Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say a warm welcome to all of you. I'm delighted to be here at the first European Humanitarian Forum, and what a success it has been already today, with a very full day with lots of interesting discussions and speakers. My name is Panos Mumsis. I consider myself as a long-time humanitarian. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Executive Leadership Initiative, GELI as we call it, a new initiative that focuses on the role of leadership in our sector. I'm going to say two words first in French, giving a heads up to our interpreters. Alors, d'abord, je voudrais remercier la Commission européenne et surtout la présidence de la France pour cette excellente initiative et surtout pour avoir accepté et avoir cette séance sur leadership. C'est une reconnaissance, c'est la première fois que je le vois dans nos conférences, d'avoir une séance spécifiquement pour élaborer, discuter, j'espère inspirer nous tous, surtout qu'on a un panel exceptionnel sur le rôle de leadership, le rôle que leadership joue dans notre secteur, surtout où nous travaillons. Most speakers, and I'd like to start with some logistics arrangements. So I'll be introducing one speaker at a time. As you see, we have already 4 of them, distinguished leaders, who I'll be introducing in a minute. And then I'm delighted we have 2 more speakers who will be joining online, and I will introduce them as we go through the event. This is a hybrid event, as you know, and we are really all thrilled to be those of you who are in Brussels and to see all of you in the room. But also I want to say a warm welcome to all the participants who have joined us virtually, who are with us and who will be attending, but also the speakers who will be attending with us as we go through. When I give the floor to the speakers, I'd like you obviously to turn on your cameras so we can all see you in the big screen right behind me here in the room. Otherwise, all attendees who are online and speakers, please stay on mute as we go through this presentation and events. This is an event where there is a simultaneous interpretation in English and in French. Channel 1 is in English, Channel 2 is in French. So feel free to adapt to what makes it more comfortable for you. I'd like also to highlight that this event is recorded and it will be available at the European Humanitarian Forum platform after this event. We're going to start with some brief interventions, and I will be asking a question to each of the panelists. They will have each 5 minutes to reflect, to share their reflection. And the focus of this session is very specific. We're talking about leadership, leadership behavior, leadership skills, and I've asked each panelist to speak from their heart, to speak from their experience, to share their views and their perspectives through the journey that they each have had to where they are today. In the second part of the session, we're going to take questions. I've already received a number of colleagues from around the world who have said they will come live to ask a question, so we have a number of them that are lined up. We also have the Slido. As you know, this is an amazing app that is available. I encourage you all to use the Slido, and you can see behind me in the screen the Slido code. So it's hashtag EHF-AB. This connects specifically to this session. I'd like to invite you from the get-go to send us questions. We really want in this panel to make it as interactive as possible and to have a conversation with all of you. So in the second part of this panel, I will be taking questions and I'll be directing them to our distinguished panelists and asking again the wisdom of their thoughts and reflections to make sure that we have really a dialogue during this session. So, ladies and gentlemen, clearly today we would have all preferred to be meeting in a more peaceful time, and definitely our thoughts go with Ukraine and everything that is happening there. When we think of Ukraine, when you think of climate change, when we think of all these emergencies or humanitarian situations that we all face, there is one common denominator that comes in all of these situations, and this is really the role of leadership. The role of leadership on making it or breaking it, the role of leadership on making a difference, on putting the affected people at the center and making sure there is an efficient and an effective response in terms of what the way we operate on the ground. So, and that's really going to be the focus of this panel, where we're looking about leadership and how the leadership really plays a key role on bringing the best possible results in operations. In 2022, we had an annual budget of $43 billion in the humanitarian sector. This is a significant amount, and these $43 billion are spent through about 48 leadership teams in 48 countries, where important decisions are made on the allocation, on the decision, on the effectiveness, on the results. So leadership, really, an investment in leadership is of paramount importance. And we believe that actually we don't invest sufficiently on leadership development in our sector. When we all take these positions, there is a massive expectation to do the best as we can. Now, what has also happened in the last few years, the complexity of the humanitarian responses has really increased significantly. And most of leaders, all of the leaders, have to juggle a multiplicity of factors and indicators to be able to bring the best results. Leaders working with the United Nations, leaders working with NGOs, national NGOs, ICRC, the Red Cross family, are all required in today's complex environments to build coalitions, to build trust between the different constituencies, to build bridges, to work within our system, a very complex system that we have as it is today, while, of course, doing all of that while keeping the affected people at the heart of the response, making sure that we're driven by their needs to best respond to what we can do to really serve them in the operations where we are. And this is why the Global Executive Leadership Initiative, where I'm working, we have placed the question of leadership behavior, leadership development at the center of what we do to be able to bring results as the best as we can to the operations. And with that, I would like to move immediately to our panelists. And I'm delighted to be, first of all, welcoming live from New York, Volker Turk. Volker is the Undersecretary General for Policy at the Office of the United Nations Secretary General in New York. And I'm delighted to welcome and see Volker with us on the screen. Volker has indicated he would be with us just for the initial first segment, and really with huge appreciation with everything else, Volker, that you were able still to join us live for this important session. So Volker, I'd like to start with the first question and say that one of the really most critical elements of leadership, when we talk about leadership, is the question of leadership and courage, leadership and adherence to values and to principles. Values and principles that guide our work, not just at the United Nations, but at the broader humanitarian community where we work. You yourself have worked, first of all, through past assignments, including many years at UNHCR, including as Assistant High Commissioner for Refugees on the question of leadership and protection. And of course, in your current position, working at the Office of the Secretary General. And I want to make reference in particular to the call for human rights, call to action for human rights, an initiative that was really launched by the Secretary General 2 years ago. And of course, bearing in mind the role of leadership and the call for action, and we all follow what's happening in Ukraine or in other parts of the world, Volker, I want to ask with the first question and ask you, how is this enhanced role on the action for human rights actually working in action? How does it work in terms of the operations and ensuring that the leadership is supported to bring the best in terms of leadership and courage, leadership and adherence to values and principles? So Volker, you're very, very welcome. We can all see you in the screen. I think you can also hear us. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Panos, and it's great that you have a specific discussion on transformative leadership at this very critical time that we face, unfortunately, again, a horrendous war in Ukraine. And let's not forget, we also have many other conflicts and war situations around the world. And we should also not forget the global repercussions that the war has in Ukraine on many countries. I see Najat is with us. I know Lebanon in particular is already suffering from the consequences of this particular war. So you mentioned the call to action for human rights, which the Secretary General launched 2 years ago. And it was precisely to ensure that the UN system as a whole takes advantage of previous initiatives and focuses on a very strong human rights-based orientation in all its work. And I would like to combine it with 4 ingredients of leadership in humanitarian settings, and frankly also beyond humanitarian settings. I think it goes to working together in UN country teams as well, that are related to the call to action for human rights. The first is, you mentioned it already, is this very strong orientation and focus on individuals and communities. We need to understand them, we need to listen to them, we need to consult with them, we need to engage them in everything that we do. We need to be oriented, if you like, motivated by their needs, by their aspirations, by their rights. And I think that's a very, very important aspect of all the work in the humanitarian sector, but also in the development arena. And it's one that navigates us often through troubled waters, because we also know that a lot of dilemmas, sometimes a politicization even of the humanitarian space occurs. And it's always good to go back to what it is that we're actually doing, what it is that we need to do, what it is that we need to better in the lives of people and communities that are directly impacted by humanitarian crisis, by war situations, by natural disasters, and so forth. And it very much goes hand in hand with age, gender diversity, making sure that there's a strong gender equality dimension in the work, that we understand that it's also about people with disabilities, LGBTI community, minority groups, older people, and that we understand the whole spectrum of the affected populations that we are dealing with. The second ingredient is the rule of law dimension. And we are witnessing now what international rule of law really means and what the Charter means. It's the principles and values that are in the Charter, that are in the human rights framework. It is about understanding humanitarian action from a rule of law perspective, which, as we see in many conflicts around the world, is often in its breach rather than in its compliance. But it should not at all deter us from pursuing a very strong rule of law dimension in all the work that we are doing, and making sure that it is about implementation, talking to those who need to be talked to about precisely an engagement on rule of law dimension, especially when it comes to international humanitarian law, but also, of course, international human rights law and those, of course, international refugee law. But that's absolutely critical. And the rule of law dimension is one that is mentioned very specifically in the call to action, but also in the Our Common Agenda report that the Secretary General issued last year, which is about the future of multilateralism. The third ingredient is a culture of protection. And I know that many of you have been working on protection in different settings. And this is, again, about knowing how we can get the best outcome for people that are affected by conflict and violence and natural disasters, understanding the art of it, how to convince, how to persuade, how to engage, how to interact, how to intervene. And it's, again, about this culture of understanding the right spaces and the needs and aspirations of people and the rights of people that are of concern to the UN. And this culture of protection, you probably have seen in the Common Agenda report, for example, the aspiration to issue a system-wide agenda for protection that puts the different elements of protection into one and portrays this as one of the fundamental values and principles of what the UN stands for. And the last point, the last ingredient, is about partnership and coordination and collaboration. We did a study last year on integration within the UN between peace and security actors, development, humanitarian, human rights. And we found out from a behavioral science perspective that there are certain behaviors that are very conducive to collaboration, and there are certain behaviors that are not so conducive to collaboration. And I could just recommend this study that Jordan Ryan did for us last year to you, and we can send you the link, because it gives you a lot of insight into what it is that needs to happen on the leadership front in order to ensure collaboration within teams. It's often a culture of collaboration and partnership, and not just within the UN system, but also, of course, with our non-governmental partners, with other actors, faith actors, private sector, and so forth. But it's very important to understand the behavioral insight into partnership and collaboration when it comes to the joint analysis, when it comes to programming operationally for the different results, and to see that we are best when we collaborate across the board with everyone, irrespective of whether they go into the peace and security arena, the political, the humanitarian, or the development. And that's really important. And to understand also the comparative advantage of each and every one of these actors, and understand that collaboration is actually the way to do things rather the contrary. So I think that's really very important, because this guidance by people, for people, and with people is critical when it comes to leadership. So thanks again, Panos, for inviting me to this.
Thank you, Volker. If I can follow up with a question, and I'm going to take this privilege, knowing that you won't stay with us for the Q&A. So thank you for sharing these 4 ingredients. You talked about the role of the communities, the role of flow, the culture of protection within our system, and then the partnership and collaboration, in particular also around the call of action for human rights. So if I can ask you, Volker, how would you say the call of action for human rights is working so far? And if you could give us, to bring it a little bit more to life, could give us some examples from actual operations right now, as far as you can.
So what the call to action for human rights has done is helped UN country teams, and I'm now talking more about the UN country team dimension, to actually have a discussion about the big human rights challenges that they face in different country contexts. And for instance, we in the Philippines, I've seen on civic space issues that it really helped the UN country team to come together and address some of the civic space issues, including with some of the different media outlets, but also have a discussion with the government about this. We have seen in one country, in former Yugoslavia, for example, a discussion around social contract. What does social contract mean when there is so much lack of trust between the institutions and the populations? And the government actually asked for help in this regard. Again, a very good example of how this could work. We have seen it in other contexts where you had active ongoing war, where the call to action was a very good basis, a very honest discussion within UN country teams about even the dilemmas that our colleagues face on the ground when it comes to violations of, for instance, IHL, and what to do about it, and how to make sure that that gets reported and dealt with. But also showing, in some instances, both the potential, but also the limits of humanitarian action, and being very clear about what it is that we can do at the country level, what it is that needs to be done at the regional or even at the global level. And I think that's where the call to action comes in as an extremely helpful tool to provide the framework behind such often very, very complex discussions, and helps definitely leaders to advance that particular purpose.
Thank you for illustrating it and bringing it to life. And I have to say myself, having come from the Syria operation, I remember it was one of the first contexts where we looked at the call of action, and indeed working within a system and identifying who is best positioned to raise what issue and how to bring it, of course, under the leadership of the Secretary General. If I can follow up with a further question, of course, today we all are really overwhelmed by what's happening in Ukraine, and particularly when we look at the question of the protection of civilians in the conduct of hostilities, where we have seen millions of refugees who have crossed the border, more than 10 million people who are affected, a very delicate and sensitive situation, obviously, where the international community is in a way outraged with what's happening, but of course, trying also to ensure a balancing act, speaking up in support of protection of civilians in the conduct of facilities, and for us humanitarians, respect to IHL, which is core to the raison d'etre, to why we do what we do and how we go. So I wanted to ask for some reflections, in particular on the questions of protection of civilians in the conduct of facilities and the impact it has, and of course the role of leadership to be able to speak up, but also at the same time maintain access, and this delicate balancing act as we move forward. Volker, over to you.
Yes, no, I think in all these type of situations, and maybe that's a little bit the toolbox for protection more generally, it is always about what is the best avenue in order to get to a result. If humanitarian access is the issue, well, who do you need to talk to in order to be able to get the humanitarian access? And again, this can be done sometimes at the very local level. You need to know exactly who it is that you're talking to. Can they provide the guarantees that are necessary for it, or can they not? Who has influence over them, and how can you achieve that? And sometimes, we know in our experience that these very difficult discussions often take place at the extremely local level. We have some amazing national colleagues who have developed an expertise that is often untapped and almost unknown about precisely this type of very difficult negotiations. And humanitarian access is a key ingredient to actually get implementation, or to ensure the implementation of IHL, because if we don't have access, we're not going to see what's happening, and then it's very difficult to redress it. So for me, the humanitarian access and the art of negotiating humanitarian access is absolutely critical. I think there are other areas as well where obviously we talk behind the scenes, we try to negotiate as much as we can, again, with the different parties. And I think that's extremely important, because sometimes the UN gets criticized by talking to everyone that we need to talk to, and we need to be very clear that it is critical that we are able to talk to everyone, irrespective of the political context, in order to achieve the outcome that we are supposed to achieve on the humanitarian front and on the protection of civilians front. And we should not be criticized when we talk to non-state actors, and we need to always emphasize the critical humanitarian principles that guide us in that particular work. And I think then there is also time when, if whatever we have tried to do, whatever we have done behind the scenes, it is critical, and that time to speak up and to speak out and to make it clear where things are happening. And we have seen this in so many operations around the world. Be it in Myanmar over the last couple of years, be it also in Syria, in so many situations where indeed we have seen violations of IHL in an egregious manner, and it's absolutely critical for us to be able to say what is happening, and in order to also address some of those grievances that people have, and the egregious violations of IHL that occur.
Thank you, Volker. I can see lots of head nodding in the room in agreement with what you're saying, really, on the being able to raise the IHL concerns, principles, and to follow it through. I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'll let you go, because I know you have other commitments. I would really like to pick up to the fourth ingredient of the leadership that you articulated, and this is really about partnership and collaboration. It's about our ability as, first of all, UN, but also the broader community, to come together in a way on what needs to happen from a vision, from an objective and results point of view. And as you know, we're often seeing that we have silos in our system. First of all, silos between different mandates within the UN itself and trying to bring us all together. But also, we also see, and we have here in the panel, distinguished colleagues from leadership positions with NGOs, the Federation, Red Cross, and often sometimes it's seen that we also have silos in between the UN, the NGOs, the Red Cross, and the broader family. So when you look at the role of leadership, what would you say needs to happen more to bring kind of a better togetherness, a better joint-up approach to bring the results that we want when we look at the questions of values and principles?
I think the most important for me, including when we looked at this study that was done by Jordan Ryan, is to ensure that we get out of our silos, that we do not think of it in a fragmented way, but that we actually appreciate the different perspectives that the different parts of the system, both within the UN and outside the UN, bring to the table. And I think that's it's this mutual understanding of each other's vantage point, of understanding that each of us have a piece of the puzzle of a particular situation, have a contribution to it, and to approach it with a sense of humility and with a sense of gratitude to other colleagues, so that we actually get the best result. I think it's almost soft. It's these soft skills that we need to really nurture when it comes to leadership. And not these hierarchical, bureaucratic type of processes that we are often mired in, but actually to really think about collaboration and teamwork and soft skills in order to get the best possible result in a very difficult situation that we, especially in the humanitarian arena, are often confronted with. We get the best from each other when we respect each other, when we trust each other, when we think that each and everyone is aiming for the same common purpose, which we are within the United Nations, that we don't have second thoughts about that and second guessing, but actually pull in the same direction. Then I think we will get the best possible result, but also recognize the diversity and the comparative advantage of each and every actor. And we bring that to the fore, and then I think we will get the best possible result within an incredibly complex world that we are faced with today.
Volker, thank you for setting the bar very high, because indeed this understanding each other, the sense of humility, the results, the soft skills are all really very important indeed to bring us more together than ever before. And I would say the complexity of the times is such that we absolutely, every leader has the role to be able to do that as we move forward. Volker, I really like to thank you on behalf of everybody here and the European Union, who is really hosting this event, for taking the time in your very heavy, busy schedule to be with us live today. We won't keep you any longer, so we appreciate and really appreciate also the support you give, I know, to the Secretary General in these very difficult times and complex situations. So really, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Sorry for leaving you.
No problem. Thank you. We fully appreciate. So I'm now going to turn into the panelists. But before I do that, I'd like to remind everybody who is either virtually or in the room that we have, first of all, the Slido, where you're very welcome to send questions as we go to our panelists. I'd also like to encourage you all who are using social media to go on Twitter. The hashtag is the European Humanitarian Forum, and really use it, that your voice, to amplify beyond those who's in the room and beyond those who is actually following us as well, to share any reflections and to really encourage this conversation on leadership beyond the actual room that we have here. And Nena, I'm going to go first to you, and I'd like to introduce Nena Stolkovic, who is the Undersecretary General for Global Relations, Humanitarian Diplomacy, and Digitalization at the International Federation of Red Cross. Nena, we're really delighted to have you here. And given your diverse experience, both in the private sector, in the financial sector, of course now within the Federation, I'd like to ask you the question, when we talk about transformative leadership, and actually this session is to inspire transformative leadership, how do we make in our work in the humanitarian sector the impossible possible? We're often given impossible tasks in very difficult situations. How do we make the impossible possible in complex situations where we operate? And how do we really bring that transformation to bring better results within our sector as we're moving forward? So Nena, over to you. You have 5 minutes to share reflections and inspire us all.
Thank you very much, Panos. It's a great pleasure to be at this panel and to be joined by my esteemed colleagues on the panel. I also believe that leadership in the humanitarian sector should be authentic and principled, as Volker just said. And for me to be authentic at this panel, talking about leadership, I cannot resist but not talking about how do we link development, finance and development work with humanitarian finance and humanitarian work. That feels very authentic to me, and if you don't mind, I will mention maybe 3 points related to that, because I think collectively, if we find a way to work differently with development organizations, we will be able to make the impossible possible, and we will be able to take things to scale. The number that you mentioned of 43 billion per year, that's a size of just one, perhaps multilateral development bank, and a multiple of that is the balance sheet of some of them, and I worked for the largest one in the world. That's in fact where I met Charlotte in her previous role. I was working for the private sector arm of the World Bank group. So what comes to mind is the attempt of those organizations to reach the most vulnerable, the poorest of the poor, and people in the vulnerable communities in Africa, and very often their funding falls short because the funding goes through the governments or to private sector projects. When I joined the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent National Societies, I realized that the organization is actually present through the work of our national societies in 170,000 communities. And to me, the big challenge that we have is how to link the funding that's much larger than what we can tap to as humanitarian agencies to the needs of those people in 170,000 communities worldwide. And in my mind, for those communities, it doesn't matter what is development and what is humanitarian. They live in the nexus and they need solutions so that they can live happy lives, safe lives in resilient communities. I wanted to mention one example that's close to my heart, very recent, where Africa Union leaders sat together and decided, obviously as a result of COVID-19, that in Africa they need better community health workers workforce. And they sat together and agreed that they will do that in 55 countries in Africa and chose IFRC as a partner to help them train 5 million community health workers in 55 countries in Africa over the next 5 years. To me, that's programmatic. That's large. It's going to cost billions of dollars to pay for that. And of course, IFRC will not be able to do it alone, but linking to development agencies, linking to other partners, we will be able to say that we have made a big impact on the public health care sector in Africa by doing it. Another thought that comes to mind, again, from my development MENC experiences, most of the financing approaches there were programmatic, multi-year, looking for a sustainable long-term impact. When I turn back to the humanitarian sector, in most cases we would be addressing really immediate crisis. And in my mind, thinking more programmatically as humanitarian sector leaders, being able to come up with multi-year quality funding platforms to prepare our local actors, make communities more resilient, that would be one other way how we can lead in the sector. And the recent programmatic pilot partnership with DG ECHO that IFRC entered into, which is now in the inception phase, is a 3-year program in 5 critical areas, including migration, including climate resilience, for 210 million euros, which will allow us to do the work in 25 countries through one single reporting and through a coordination with local actors. And the third one, with my 15 seconds left, is very dear to my heart, because when we talk about billions to trillions as part of how we will have to fund SDGs, we obviously know where trillions are. Trillions are with the private sector and institutional investors, and as humanitarian leaders, we need to find a way to come up with some of the instruments that go beyond grants, that will encourage and get private sector interested in supporting these root causes, if I may say, in those communities that I talked about. So with that, Panos, I leave it to you.
Thank you, Nena. Thank you very much. And what I heard you talk is about this transformation, the struggle we've had for years, bringing together the short term and the long term to build the resilience, and really how do we go beyond today from the beginning, but also about building resilience and skills to make the impossible possible, really starting from an early point rather than finding ourselves at the last minute. And then, of course, your last question on the localization, which I know is in everybody's heart, but both in terms of the funding, the skills, the strategy, the ability to bring it all together. Really, thank you for your reflections. I'd like to move now to Charlotte, and I'm delighted to present Charlotte Slenter, the Secretary General of the Danish Refugee Council, DRC, a great partner in many operations we have around the world. And Charlotte, having come from a long career, including at the diplomatic service of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark. So, Charlotte, I'd like to ask you, in terms of leadership, when we look back at our sector, we have somehow moved from the one-person heroic leadership to working a lot more in collaborative leadership in teams. And we all recognize the importance of the person who is on the lead to be able to bring a team along in the way they go to bring results. At the same time, we often hear the NGOs being the most critical voice within our system, talking about a system that perhaps has become a little bit too heavy, too mechanic, not enough focus in terms of building trust or a clear vision for a way forward. So Charlotte, I'm curious, and I would really like to hear your thoughts about that. How do you see the question of leadership in today's complex situation, both in terms of coordination, the trust, the diversity of views? So, Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to join this panel, and hello to my fellow panelists here as well. I think when it comes to leadership in the humanitarian sector, there are a number of issues that stand out and that might be a little bit different from leadership in other sectors. One is the willingness to work around risks. I mean, we work in a very, very risky world wherever we are. And we often work in circumstances where all other people have withdrawn because of the level of risk that exists. I think you can all think about 100 situations where the humanitarians were the last one left, where private enterprises have left and other institutions have left. The Ebola crisis, Ukraine now, Libya. I mean, this is not an environment where you normally would like to work. We need to work there. We also work in an environment that is changing constantly, and we have to adapt to new challenges constantly. And I think that actually puts a lot of we need to put a lot of focus on what kind of leadership do we want to build in that kind of situation. And I think it's, I mean, to try to sort of put a few areas here under the spotlight is that we need to move away from thinking of our own organization as a closed place where we can thrive internally. This is basically opening up, allowing more open participation and relationship between our own organizations and others. So in the transformative leadership and in building our leaders, we should say this is the name of the game. We need to be opening up and really working with others, and that relationship between our own organization and the surrounding world is the thing that will do the trick, not if we only sort of internally serve ourselves as an organization. That requires us actually to delegate quite a lot of competence and responsibility to leaders in the field. It needs us to be able to trust them very much. So we need to build trust in our organizations at all levels, to delegate responsibility, and we need to have leaders and employees who are sort of set free in the local circumstances to invent and to work with other partners to collaboratively create good solutions. I think we all know multiple examples of humanitarian coordination that didn't work, but I think it's more interesting to actually look at what do we need in terms of leadership skills to make it work. In order to be able to lead on adaptive responses and take risks, that actually requires a lot of close collaboration with the whole humanitarian sector, including national civil society organizations, among many others. Because innovation doesn't take place in your own organization, and I think we see it more and more. Innovation in the humanitarian sphere takes place across organizations. It's when organizations come together with their different mandates, with their different skill sets, with their different level of access in the communities they work in, that we actually create innovation. So only when we start understanding that by actually working in that way, I think we can come closer to becoming better at coordinating. So what does that require of it? I think Volker talked a little bit about those, what he called soft skills, that actually turn out to become very hard skills, because it's about humility, it's about capacity to listen, it's about accepting that the solutions developed by others might be better than the solutions developed by ourselves. So good humanitarian leaders, they build trust and confidence and have that courage to understand that they are not the center of the world themselves. They are part of an ecosystem that they need to work and thrive in. Then a few words on on inclusivity and diversity. I think in Denmark, at least, there are 100 studies showing that diversity and inclusiveness in leadership brings better results, brings more development, brings more innovation. Nevertheless, we move extremely slowly. And I think that also goes for the humanitarian sector internationally. So I believe that in order to develop good humanitarian leadership, we need to walk that talk as well. We need to, in our recruitment, make sure that we are inclusive. And this is because we want to get close to understanding the needs of the people we serve and be able to innovate for them. And the more diverse our leadership and personnel, sort of our setup of personnel is, the better are we to understand collectively what are the needs of people here that we want to serve. And this is about overcoming a number of biases in our organization, not recruiting the one who looks like ourselves and do like ourselves and speak like ourselves, but actually be brave enough to go out and work both with conscious biases, but also with unconscious biases. And that is one of the ways we can actually, I think, also grow our leadership. And now I can see I have 7 seconds left. So the other comments I'll have here, I'll reserve for some answers on maybe potential questions.
Thank you, Charlotte. Maybe something none of you knows, that there is a huge clock here, which is really horrible in red, and it clicks very quickly. So thank you for sticking within the time, Charlotte. But also thank you for your points, really. First of all, building on Nana's and also on Volker's responses, the question of humility, capacity to bridge, to listen, to bring us together, not to go always with our own kind of blind agendas, and that's what we will do, and all of you have to do what I say I'm going to do, because that's really the only way to bring us together. But also, I heard it coming from your heart when you talked about the question of diversity, and you spoke about, in a way, the kind of blind bias that many of us have, including on recruitment. We're talking about localization. We all want to hire a version of ourselves, and indeed, what richness it brings in our sector, both in terms of innovation, different perspectives to move us forward. So really, thank you, and for the courage. From what I understand, this is something you are applying, actually. It's not just words. It's something you are leading at the Danish Refugee Council to make it happen in the recruitment on the way forward. So thank you for that. With that, I'd like to move now to our next speaker. And the next speaker is online. And it's really my delight and pleasure to introduce Najat Roshdi, who is the United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Lebanon. Najat, wonderful to see you now in the screen, and fantastic to have you joining us for Lebanon. We're very sorry, and we miss you not having us here with you in Brussels, but nevertheless, we're delighted. Najat has had also an extensive career on multiple positions within the system, and of course before that in your own country. And you're really leading, you're in a leadership role in one of the countries that is really close to our heart for all of us in Lebanon, with the complexity and challenges that are taking place. And Najat, I'd like to ask you, clearly Lebanon is one of the most complex and fragile situations, where the relationship between the humanitarian, the development, the political, both Volker, Nana, several of the speakers make reference to this, that nexus is extremely important in your leadership role to bring it all together in a country with enormous fragility and complexity that has gone through a very long time of a challenging situation. So Najat, based on your very own experience and path, I'd like to ask you if you could really share with us, what do you see as the most critical aspects of your leadership role where you are? Najat, ahlan wa sahlan, and the floor is yours.
Dear Panos, and it's great seeing you and great seeing everybody. And I'm so sorry I am not there. I mean, but you know, Lebanon is going through a very different sets of crises. So I apologize for that. And I have found, so far the intervention really, really very interesting and inspiring, I have to say. And I learned that there are a number of things that I need to change as someone who is really trying to lead as much as possible. I have to say that when referring to transformative leadership, I think about a whole set of actions, but also of principles and values that are very important to inspire positive changes, because we are operating in always in very complex and challenging environment, and it's so important to keep mobilizing, all the teams, obviously, all the partners, and to keep the fight, obviously. And for me, as a United Nations resident and humanitarian coordinator, whether in Lebanon or in the former positions I had, I really try to insinuate energy. It's very important because it's very draining and exhausting, to work in this kind of environment. Enthusiasm, because what we do makes a difference. What we do save lives. What we do save hopes, and it's important also, to address it. Collective ownership as well. It does not belong to one organization. It does not belong to one component. It belongs to all of us, and that also comes with a collective accountability. And of course, putting the people at the center and committing really seriously, genuinely, and effectively to do everything possible to preserve their dignity, but also to preserve their hope. Because most of the time, we are operating in countries where there is a failure of the social contract, as Volker was saying in the beginning. And because of the failure of the social contract, there is a huge deficit of trust. And therefore, it's really important to avoid that the people are completely plunging into hopelessness. For me, of course, the way I have tried to exercise my leadership was, first of all, to build bridges and generate solutions, concrete ones, not, I'm sorry to use the term, blah, blah, and create opportunities, obviously, for the most vulnerable, and give a sense to leave no one behind. It's as a connector, between the political actors as well, because we know that they have a very important role to play, and there is absolutely no complex to do it. With the army, in some cases, when the explosion of the port of Beirut happened, there was declaration of a state of emergency. So the army took over. So of course, we had also to deal with them, but also to educate them about the humanitarian principles. As a convener, bringing different interests around the same table, but also sometimes as a fierce fighter, pushing people out of the comfort zone, because traditional and conservative solutions are not always the answer in very complex environments. And as you know very well, Panos, and we have been addressing that together in our former, position, is also pushing, the agencies and the national and international NGOs out of their comfort zone. And that is difficult, it's challenging, but it's really important to do it. But also decisive principle change maker who are keen to induce positive changes, as I told you, in people's life, exhausting all possibilities, and not to stop to the first solution every day. If we need to revise, we should revise. We should have the humility to say, okay, that was not the right thing to do, or it was not the right option. Let's revise it. Let's bring everybody again around the same table. Let us do better. Let us do more, because we have this duty to protect. And more importantly than all of that, and all of that leading actually to an effective response to humanitarian crisis without jeopardizing our guiding humanitarian principles. And in the complex crisis we are managing, and in Lebanon in particular, it's so important that we remain principled. You might think those are big words, or I am the idiot of the village because I believe in ideal world. Well, yes, I confirm. I believe in ideal word because that's exactly what the word needs. For us to have a chance to end people suffering and to achieve really peace and restore trust, as I said in the beginning. And we can do it collectively. Of course, as a United Nations resident and humanitarian coordinator, sometimes it is a completely schizophrenic position, by the way. But I think it's, yes, it comes with its challenges, but it's also really unique in actually bringing everybody together, especially in a country who is going through several layers of crisis and is governed by 18 different religions and confessions and priorities and interests, definitely not putting people at the center. So there is really a vital role to bring all different stakeholders together, while it's not an easy task. And it imposes on me and all of us involved in the response actually to do things differently, and bringing on the same table at the earliest stage the humanitarian, the development, the politically, the military actors, and obviously to bridge between the humanitarian quick fix and emergency response and what I call, the emergency developments, meaning it's developments with a humanitarian speed, where we address in this nexus the best way to end humanitarian needs, for example. So our identification of those needs, of those gaps, should be followed immediately with the resources, with the project, with the programs that also are very serious about ending those humanitarian needs and giving a life to those lives we saved with the humanitarian assistance. It is also important that we keep in mind that sometimes when we are not doing the humanitarian assistance the proper way, it is also a source of tensions. And therefore, we could trigger also those tensions, especially in light of scarcity of resources. And we all know anyway that despite the growing humanitarian needs and the donors' generosity, humanitarian assistance will never be the sustainable solution. Sometimes we forget about that because we are caught in the middle of the emergencies, but it's so important that we always keep it in mind as in the very beginning and not at the end of a process. It's not an issue of sequencing. It's an issue of, in the beginning, having a clear vision about, yes, I have life-saving imperative, I have humanitarian imperative, but at the same time, bridge with other imperative, which is really about starting recovery, starting emergency development, which ultimately will lay the ground for sustainable development and lasting peace. Otherwise, we are just all the time relapsing into a vicious circle.
Thank
and
you,
it's
Najat.
so
If I can
important
ask
that
you
we
to wrap
stick
up,
to that.
please.
I'm going to conclude
Thank you.
immediately. I really think that in one sentence that it takes rapid to adapt leaders and to adjust for changing situation, people-centered, but also collective, inclusive, accountable, and principled leadership, not only from us, but also from the donors, because they need also to have their resources where their mouth is. Over to you.
Najat, thank you so much for the energy that you bring in, but also adhering in your leadership role to the values, the principles. When you talked about the leader, I wrote a long list of adjectives from bridge builder to innovator, the connector. Also really welcome your new term, the emergency development, which is really refreshing also to think of the innovation. Indeed, the same theme that has come up, the short term and the long term, but also the principle leadership. And I really salute you for that, because indeed we have been together in many situations, more recently in Syria. We're sticking to the principles and the values that brings the humanity and what it is about we're doing. So Najat, thank you very much. And I'm now going to move into our next speaker here in the panel in Brussels. And it's my pleasure to introduce Ghada Al-Jadba. Ghada is the Chief Field Health, he's the Chief for the Health Programs for UNRWA in Gaza. Ghada is based in Gaza. This is where she's lived all her life, coming from refugee parents, and we're talking about localization. What better example to see somebody that grows from within the community and takes a lead role on running programs that are for your community, the community that you're working in Gaza. So, Ghada, I would like to ask you, leading health operations for UNRWA in Gaza really must be one of the most challenging tasks, particularly given the extraordinary situation and the complex political security tension that has existed in Gaza, not for 1 year, not for 5 or 10 years, but really for multiple decades. So my question is, what would you say is the most important leadership characteristic leading a response under these extraordinary circumstances that we see in Gaza? Ghada, over to you.
Thank you, Bonas, and it is really a great opportunity for me to be in this important forum. Maybe, yes, my contribution will be slightly different because I am leading, operating humanitarian services in UN agency, and in the same time, I am a local staff from the same community. I have been leading the health program in Gaza since 2015, which came shortly after the conflict in Gaza in 2014, very long, very aggressive conflict, which lifted Gaza in massive destruction, in deterioration of all of the life aspects, deterioration of all of the health determinants, talking about political, as Banos mentioned, yes, it is very political situation, and every time and all of the time as a leader in UN agency, we need to be very strict in neutrality, impartiality, and in high professionalism. It is not easy. And also the economic situation, deterioration of the economic situation in Gaza with deepening of the poverty. Most of the Palestinian refugees in Gaza, they rely on UNRWA, on food assistance and health services. The social degradation in Gaza, which is due to blockade for years. And believe me, this blockade is not only blockade on the borders. No, it is also the blockade of the minds of people, with more and more social isolation that hit and affect badly and increase the vulnerability of the already vulnerable refugees, mainly women and children. With this extraordinary situation, in addition to the collapse of the fragile public healthcare system in Gaza, this increased the situation to be more difficult. And this extraordinary situation needs all of the time from me to have extraordinary actions. With the financial constraint hit on UNRWA years after years, it also needs a lot of power and to cope with and to have creative solutions even to cope with these challenges. Challenges with repeated conflicts, repeated escalations, Great March of Return, COVID-19, which came with another lockdown on the top of the prevailing blockade in Gaza. So we need to continue to serve the population. So we need the refugees in Gaza. We need to cope with all of these issues. This is about resilience. Again, resilience. So to find in our own selves the inner strengths in order to absorb shocks and to stand again, to continue serving and providing humanitarian services to the vulnerable Palestinian refugees. And being one of the Palestinian refugees, in fact, I have the same sufferings. I have the same threats, and I have the same attacks. In May the last year, there was massive hostilities in Gaza. And this came, in fact, after dealing and responding with COVID-19 as health leaders for more than 1 year. And everyone knows that how much COVID-19 even led to collapse of some of the advanced healthcare systems in the world. So what about the fragile healthcare system in Gaza? So we were very exhausted. We were very tired to face and to respond to another crisis of different kind, hostility. And as a person and as a leader, it was very difficult to me. So those days, they were the most difficult days in my life. And I can remember a night when there was a huge, massive, and aggressive air attacks and bombing everywhere in my area where I live. At that night, really, I thought that everyone thought that the bombing is on the building, and everyone started to shout, everyone started to run out of the building. I was with my son alone. My husband works as a surgeon in the main hospital in Gaza. He was busy in serving hundreds of injured persons in this bloody night. In fact, at that night, I was holding my son. I was thinking that is the end. Thanks God, we were saved. But I didn't feel I am alive for a while, because it was really a real massacre. Hundreds of people, they were killed and injured around us. Tens of families, they were totally killed. Some of them, the family of our colleague, he is a doctor, he was responsible of COVID-19 cases in Gaza. All of his family members, they were killed, except one of his sons. It was very painful. And it really was a lot of sufferings. But in the morning, I had to go to work in order to try to open the health centers, try to support the shelters in order to serve the Palestinian refugees and in order to support the displaced persons. So what drives us as leaders? What energizes us as leaders to do that? But before that, when I went out from my home and I saw the destruction around me, in fact, what I have seen, it is not, it cannot be described. It can only felt. So, again, what drives us with all of this suffering and pain and fear and concerns to continue working, to continue serving, to continue make a difference in the people's life, it is the passion. For myself, I believe that without the passion, there is no real leader. Without the passion, there is no transformative leadership at all. Transformative leadership is about the passion, is about the belief that we can make a difference in the people's life. So, by this passion, by this inner strength, we succeed to deal with extraordinary situations. But sometimes we feel exhausted. Sometimes we feel frustrated because, yes, we are leaders, but we are humans. And because of that, the inner strength and the passion, I don't think it is enough. There is a need for this external strength and this external support to support us to continue being standing, working, leading, and transforming the misery, the dark, and the despair into life.
Dr. Ghada, if you please wrap up, thank you.
My end words is about my goal as a leader, and my hope as a Palestinian refugee, and my wish as a human, and my dream as a mother of 3 amazing kids. They are not kids anymore, by the way, thanks God. They are about to be doctors, is not only to spend our lives surviving, but to live the full potentials and all of the dimensions of life. Because on that land, what deserves to be lived, and because as humans, the Palestinian refugees deserve that life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghada. Thank you, first of all, for telling us your personal story. And as you were talking, I could feel it in your voice coming really from your heart, both on the vision, the cause, your leadership, but also the resilience to be able to absorb the shocks that come one after another, and that inner strength that is so vital in what we do to help us move forward. I'm actually going to move to another medical doctor, and it's my pleasure to introduce Giovanni Varela, who's the director of Primeros Auxilios Luz, PALUZ as it's called, a local NGO in Venezuela. Giovanni, you've really had an incredible journey And we are really celebrating here leadership on this panel, leadership from many parts of the world, but also leadership at whatever level, and I dare say whatever age. Most probably you're the youngest panelist, with all due respect to everybody else who's here, really bringing your leadership from where you are as a young medical doctor having just graduated. And my question to you is, often in our sector there is a politicization of humanitarian operations. And really this becomes kind of the name of the game in many situations, where politics comes in the middle of us pursuing our values and principles, humanity, partiality, neutrality, independence, and our ability to do the right thing, whatever position we are, to help the people who are in the most really desperate situation. So I wanted to ask you, how has been your own experience in Venezuela? If you could tell us a little bit with your own path and what you've done so far.
Of course. First of all, thank you for that question and the invitation to take part on this important panel. Well, it has been the most grateful, challenging experience I've ever had. I started as a humanitarian worker since I was 21 years old, back in 2017. When I decided to step out of the classrooms and onto the streets to deliver free medical attention to people in need, in what was a very difficult time for Venezuelans in the social and political conflict that took place that year, under the core principles of impartiality and neutrality, to be able to work in such a dangerous context and highly politicized. That's how Paluz was born, in what at the beginning was a group of young people trying to help the most needed in extreme circumstances. And talking about localization, and taking from Mrs. Gara's contribution, stepping forward and out of the comfort zone to get involved in a local conflict, in a local crisis, as a local, is even more difficult because we face different challenges and risks as part of the, or as a victim of the same crisis. So when more and more people start getting involved, it's when you realize you owe yourself not only to the communities or the beneficiaries, but you owe yourself as well to your work team, who has found that same passion in the organization's mission to aid the most needed and vulnerable. And being loyal towards my wonderful team is what gave me the courage to keep moving forward in such a dangerous context. And being courageous in highly politicized contexts also means being smart and strategic. And that's how, after several months, hundreds of people aided, a fellow colleague lost during service, and a growth to over 100 volunteers in the healthcare sector, this original conflict ceased. But our mission remained the same, to deliver aid to the most needed and vulnerable wherever they are. And this brings me to one of the most important characteristics I think every organization, every humanitarian organization should have, which is adaptability. And especially in social dynamic contexts like Venezuela's, that changes day to day. So we adapted and stepped forward to the communities to deliver free healthcare and treatments in hard-to-reach places since 2018. And in highly politicized contexts, the communities take part in the way of thinking that every kind of aid comes from either political side, and it is very common for humanitarian organizations to be seen as one side or the other. So it is very important for leaders to know or to have as a priority to unlink and depoliticize our work, delivering aid with the humanitarian principles as guidance, and with the affected populations as the core of the implementation, to educate them on these principles and ultimately protect the systems and not put it at risk. This is also, as taken from Mrs. Charlotte's contribution, taking the affected populations, letting them take part on every step of the process, from the needs assessment to the decision making and to the implementation, as we encourage new local leaders to guarantee sustainability once we are not there as an organization. And as Paluz continues, kept growing in volunteers and escalating its operations, we started detecting new needs in different contexts. So we stepped forward to a new sector and as implementing partner with UNICEF, started working nutrition since 2019 in highly vulnerable communities. And it was very important for us as a leader to use always a solution-based or solution-focused language to avoid getting involved in any kind of controversy that could put aid at risk and us as locals at risk because of the politicization in our country. And on the contrary, to empower the communities to own their projects and be part of their solutions. And by 2020, with the beginning of the pandemic, we started delivering assistance to healthcare facilities with the original healthcare vision we had, and providing access to wash services and supplies. But over that, to look forward, to link key actors on non-politicized environments to work on strengthening the channels of communications between them to work on further solutions once we were not there, which was the big advantage of working in these environments. As we continue to grow and adapt and moving forward, we're looking forward to expanding our horizons beyond our states and countries' borders to continue to fulfill our mission of giving aid to the most needed wherever they are. And all of this goes all the way back to that very first day when we decided to give free medical attention to people in need, and has only been possible thanks to the principles of independence, humanity, impartiality, and neutrality. And as a lesson from my experience in Venezuela and from the great contribution from Mrs. Gara, I think it is very possible for local leaders, no matter how hard it seems or how dangerous the context is or how big or small you can start, to go forward, take a step forward, follow your passion, find your purpose, and after all, remain always true to your principles, values, and overall to your communities. Thank you.
Wow. Really, thank you, Giovanni, for sharing your own experience, and what an extraordinary story. Leadership and courage, leadership and being smart, being strategic, being adaptive, adjusting to the changing context, but sticking to the principles. And I think that's always the best possible way. So, colleagues, we're now in the next part of the session, and I'm delighted to have a signal that we have about a dozen questions. I'm going to take you on a tour around the world because there are so many colleagues who are online who have indicated they want to ask a question. I also want to say, use Slido, but also indicate to me with your hand if you want to come to the front and take the microphone as well. And we really want to make it as interactive. So I'm going to be very strict in the next part. I'm going to ask colleagues to each will have 2 minutes maximum to ask a question. And then I'm going to come to the panelists, and each would have 2 minutes maximum. And we can take, a couple of colleagues so we can take as many of the questions as we have in the remaining 25 minutes or so that we have until 1/2 the hour. And for the first question, I'm going to take us all to Afghanistan. And I'm delighted to be joined live by Assunta Charles, who works with the World Vision, is the World Vision National Director. And Assunta, I don't know, I can see you in the screen. You're very welcome. I understand you have a question for the panelists. So you have 2 minutes. The floor is over. Assunta.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really appreciated. I just want to share with you a dream, which will be followed by a question. I met a small child in Afghanistan, and I asked her, what is that you want to be when you grow up? And spontaneously, she said, I want to be a leader. Practically want to be the first woman president in Afghanistan. That was the dream and the aspiration. And today, she is ruled by de facto authorities who don't even give the right to education to her. Her rights are taken away. In such a complex situation like Afghanistan, where the children's aspirations and dreams are getting collapsed, how do you see the transformational leadership becoming relevant? This is my question.
Thank you, Assunta. I'm going to take actually a second question as well, and then I'll come to the panelists and ask for feedback. And the second question, I just received a message, is actually going to be in French. So I want to give you a heads up, those of you and the interpreters, if you want to put your mics on. Et je voudrais dire bonjour à Madame Sodré Geneba, qui est la présidente de l'association Tabital locale à Burkina Faso, à Ouagadougou. Alors, Sodré, un grand bonjour et vraiment merci de nous avoir joindre à cette discussion. Et vous avez 2 minutes pour poser une question à nos panélistes. Alors, Sodré, à vous.
Merci bien. Et moi, j'aimerais un peu poser 3 questions rapidement. Et c'est d'abord demander, et pour les questions humanitaires, c'est beaucoup plus, très souvent dans des contextes difficiles. Et comment, en tout cas, transformer toutes ces stratégies et toute cette situation difficile en opportunité pour les femmes particulièrement, en les autonomisant, en les rendant beaucoup plus autonomes pour des questions de développement et beaucoup plus de questions de représentativité. Et aussi, ma deuxième question concerne un peu plus le leadership local, national de manière générale. Parce que nous constatons qu'elle est beaucoup plus entre les mains des ONG internationales. Comment assurer un transfert de compétences équitable et un transfert de compétences vraiment adapté qui puisse permettre au leadership local de pouvoir jouer un rôle de leader et pour un changement qui prenne en compte les besoins. Ma dernière préoccupation, c'est vraiment comment allier le leadership local au leadership purement féminin. Parce que toutes les crises que nous vivons, c'est beaucoup plus les femmes et les enfants qui vivent cela. Comment ne pas rester à un stade où nous sommes bénéficiaires seulement et être à un stade où le leadership féminin joue le premier rôle pour ensuite peut-être prendre le relais et pour construire un monde où l'éducation à la base est prise en compte et le développement économique des familles également sont prises en compte. Ne pas jouer juste, parce que jusqu'à présent, il n'y a pas des faveurs qu'on fait aux structures féminines là pour les permettre de jouer ce rôle de leader au niveau de leur localité. Merci et je m'excuse du temps dépassé.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Sodre. And with that, we have really kind of a number of questions, and I'm going to turn into the panelists. Questions that range in between what we heard from Kabul, from Assunta, and Ouagadougou from Sodre. And as I'm looking at the panelists, I wonder, Nana, if we could come first to you and hear your reflections. And then Charlotte, I'll come to you right after.
I mean, I will try to be quick because I would also like our local leaders from very specific situations that they explained and what happened to them to talk about that dream becoming a reality and you know how a little girl in Afghanistan dreaming to be a president can actually make that happen. If I understand correctly, you both worked in very complex situations and you made your dreams happen and you made a huge contribution to the local communities. On the other hand, PANOS, we as kind of international organizations and in particular IFRC with 192 local national societies, local NGOs, we have to start transferring some of that knowledge and the skills, and you yourself, you are involved in a variety of programs where we can maybe learn from each other and just facilitate the cross-country or cross-learning. So there is a role both for kind of organic growth in leadership and also the support that we as international organizations can provide through cross-sharing.
Thank you, Nana. Charlotte.
Well, basically very difficult questions. So how can you make transformative leadership happening in the circumstances in Afghanistan? I think here one main ingredient is sticking to principles. So a principled approach is actually what could allow maybe also female leaders to get closer to being able to aim for their aspirations, being very principled about letting female workers work and have that dialogue with the ones in power in Afghanistan, ensuring that you reach female beneficiaries despite the challenges, and that you work collectively on obtaining that principled approach to reaching beneficiaries, and among them girls and women in Afghanistan. it's not easy time, and therefore we need, back to sort of the principles of good coordination, good collaboration, to find ways of working together to ensure that principled approach. To our friend in Burkina Faso from Tapital, on the local leadership, I think it's also reverting a little bit the question, how can we work and lead through you and with you? Often local organizations also in Burkina Faso are first responders out there in the field where atrocities happen and conflict takes place. And it's about how we build solid partnerships to both rely on the strong competences and local knowledge that local organizations have, the access to people in need that local organizations have, the trust that these organizations have, and then some of the international organizations that might come in with different set of competence skills, maybe new money for helping out in a situation. So it's about trying to build that partnership in the most solid way and right from the outset of a conflict. I think that is key to actually obtaining what we want to obtain. So it's the partnership approach, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'm going to take some more questions and then come back to the panelists for more. And actually, for the next question, I'm going to take us all to New York. And I'm delighted that we have a request to ask a question by Cindy Isaac. Cindy, great to see you. Cindy is the head of the Humanitarian Leadership and Strengthening section at OCHA and currently on mission in New York. So Cindy, you have the floor. You have 2 minutes to ask your question.
Thank you very much, Panos. And I want to really say a huge thank you to the panelists for what have been very rich interventions so far. And I hear you on the need to really look at innovation, adaptation, agility, and most of all, diversification in our leadership. And I think the examples you've offered enables us to really think through how we break down barriers and silos and cross-fertilize across the leadership nexus, as we've been discussing, through better inclusion of alternative voices, such as civil society, but also looking at interagency shared learning. The question I have is really around the new generation of leadership, particularly when we look at the environmental movement and social media influencers. Do you think that they may be, in many ways, already redefining how we lead and embody what we think of as transformative leadership? With that in mind, I'd be very interested to hear from the panel on how we can take better steps to ensure a more diverse talent acquisition, particularly when we look at youth. And as for myself, coming from the UN, are we ready and open to allow for young people to take on more leadership roles? Related to this, I also wanted to ask on what we can do better in terms of building those building blocks towards learning and leadership development opportunities for those that we know have so much potential to lead. And I'm raising these questions because this year is quite an important one. When you look at the fact that 2022 is the European Year of Youth, and also when we look at the SG's commitment towards alternative voices, how can we actually capitalize on these two important initiatives strategically when we look at leadership? Thank you. Over to you, Panos.
Thank you, Cindy. This is 3, if not 4 questions in one, so thank you for that. I will be coming to the panelists, but I really want to take one more question so we can really allow the opportunity to take forward. And actually, I see a hand raised in the room, so would you please come to the front? Giovanni, would you please give the oh, you have a microphone. If you come to the front so the camera can also capture you, if you could introduce yourself and please ask the question.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm Svetlana. I'm here from Ukraine, representing NGOs from Ukraine that work together with Ministry of Health of Ukraine on sourcing medical supplies abroad and delivering and distributing them in Ukraine. And I'm really pleased to be here and hear this support that is coming from everyone here, everyone I talk to, everyone that comes up on the stage and speaks about the situation in Ukraine. I also personally want to appreciate Red Cross for what you're doing in Ukraine right now, rescuing people from very dangerous places. It touched me personally. My family members were rescued by Red Cross. So I really, really thank you all for that sort of leadership. Why am I here? Because this NGO circle that works with Ministry of Health, there's not a single international aid representative there. We know that the international aid groups operate in Ukraine in various capacities, but they're not part of those 24/7 sort of task forces. So my question to you, what kind of leadership do we need and what kind of efforts are missing from our side to fast track that connection with this huge community? And why am I emphasizing fast track? Because the circumstances are grave and our government is already openly speaking that they are unable to rescue Mariupol, which is 400,000 people trapped there for 2 weeks without water and electricity. So our government is unable to rescue them.
Thank you. Thank you very much
What
for your
can we
question.
do?
Thank you, appreciate. And of course, our heart goes to the people of Ukraine and everything that is happening right now. I'm going to turn to the panelists, and maybe I'll start from the other end and talk to Giovanni. There was a question that really came from Cindy, youth and leadership, talent acquisition. Actually, Charlotte also spoke a little bit about that. But also, Najat, you're online, and please indicate to also join us. So Giovanni, you have the floor. Answer to the questions, including the last one, which get also another panelist, perhaps Rada, to talk about the local actors and how we come there.
Okay. Regarding the youth leadership and what she asked about the social media and the new ways of leading the youth, I think it's a great opportunity to evolve into the new era of transmitting messages. Social media has great power to convey messages around the world in so small time. But it is really important to identify what are the right message we want to transmit to people and to channel all of these efforts for truly inspiring and positive messages. Because sometimes in social media, there are many viral information that is not true, that is not inspiring, or that is misguiding. So a good effort to channel all of this is to identify key leaders that are taking the social media to a new level, to use their capacity of reaching people to spread key messages about the world's realities and what can we do about them. And what are the possible solutions from the youth or the big organizations to get involved in many contexts in the currently ever-evolving humanitarian situation? Thank you.
Thank you. Rada, any reflections particularly on the latter question, how to strengthen local leadership in this particular context in Ukraine?
Okay, in fact, it is also a difficult question, but the role of leadership is not only during the normal times. The role of leadership is tested during conflict. And during the time of war in Gaza, we experience, all of the last years, we experienced a lot of conflict and war times and the military escalations. And at that times, the humanitarian issues started to be really like violated in all levels. And yes, the medical aspects and the health aspects are one of the issues that became very critical. And because of that, the leadership is very important. And this is the time to test the leadership, to test how much they are resilient, how much they are able to support the people in such, the civilians in such a situation, which is, yes, it is difficult, but now we are talking about the transformative leadership. Yes, this is the time to make a difference in in the lives of those peoples and the people who are suffering, and talking about not only the physical ones, by the way, and maybe this I missed this part in my contribution, because believe me, the psychological ones, they are very deep, and they are maybe deeper than the physical ones, and they need much and much work. Like in each crisis, and even in Gaza, after the crisis ends, a lot of efforts is started to be done in order to reconstruct Gaza, to reconstruct buildings and the streets. But for us as health leaders, when the crisis ends, our health emergency starts in order to reconstruct people, in order to treat the deep wounds and the scars. So what is happening in Ukraine now, it is really heartbreaking, and it is really the time of the leaders to support. We know that the leaders, they are part of, they have the same sufferings, they have the same fears, as I mentioned, and the same concerns, but they need, as I have mentioned, to find the inner strengths and to be strong in order to support others in need, the civilians. But also, yes, external support is needed. In such situation, tough situation, it is very important for the local leaders to be strong. It is very important for the local leaders to believe in themselves and to believe in their abilities, that they can support others. But the external support is needed also in order for from all of the UN agencies and NGOs to support you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think as earlier on when we're talking with Najat, and she said, really, you have to walk the talk, and you really have to make it in action. And this is a key case with what's happening right now in the UK context. I'm going actually to take us now to a capital, a donor capital. We're going to go to Berlin in Germany, where I understand Daniel Beck, who's the deputy head of the Division of International Humanitarian Organization and Multilateral Policy and Humanitarian Assistant, is, oh, he's here actually. Please come to the front. I somehow thought you were online. So Daniel, delighted to have you here with us, and when we're talking about leadership. And I understand you have a question. I'm going to ask you to be very brief, because we have about 7 minutes or less left till I have to close this session. So Daniel, over to you.
Thank you. And in view of the time, I skip all of this. And thanks, Panos, and thanks to the very, very inspiring panel. I just wanted to say two things. First of all, Germany is really happy to support this initiative, because that's what takes us further. And of course, looking also forward to having you in Berlin at some point soon. There is one aspect, especially focusing on the collaboration, which we wanted to touch upon. And this is where we heard a lot about the humanitarian development actors. But what about in this nexus context, what about the peace actors? That would be a question which I wanted to raise here. Basically the one urgent question, other than just supporting also what Charlotte said on the diversity issue, which we also wanted to support very much. And I'll stop here already. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your question and also your leadership. And again, putting your words in action, supporting really the leadership development. Najat, I will be coming to you in a minute about this humanitarian development political nexus. But I also would like to bring on with us on a call from Rachel Scott, who is a senior partnership advisor with UNDP. And I believe that Rachel is online. So Rachel, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And we've heard such wonderful words from truly wonderful and inspirational leaders today. So thank you everyone for your service. We've heard a lot about social protection from Volker and the need for focus on rights. We've heard from Nina about linking development finance and humanitarian finance. From Najat about how being an HC and an RC at the same time is very schizophrenic, which I think is very true. How nonetheless it's really important to bring humanitarian development and peace actors together to actually focus on ending needs and not just meeting them. But one thing we've heard from the alumni from the Nexus Academy, which is where we bring humanitarian development and peace actors together to build trust and understanding, is that actually the incentives in place during a crisis really encourage, I suppose, leaders to focus on the humanitarian side of the response. It's a well-oiled machine, the humanitarian architecture, the money flows in quickly, there's major communications opportunities and the instant gratification of having done something good for people in need. But during these crises, we also have to look at the development gains and build peace, as the colleague before talked about as well. So my question is, if you had a magic wand, what would you do differently to put the right incentives in place so that leaders are focused not just on the humanitarian aspects on crisis, but also on this very important ending need? Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. We would all love to have this magic wand, indeed, all the time. I want to bring very briefly also Bruno Pozzi, who is the regional director for UNEP. I understand you also online with a question that is, I would say, less than a minute.
Yeah, I'll be very fast, but thanks a lot. No, there are really complex interconnections between the crises we are witnessing today, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the pollution crisis, and the number of conflicts that we witness. And our response collectively to these crises needs to be interconnected, mutually reinforcing. The call would be that humanitarian action need to be sensitive to the triple planetary crisis, not just from a do no harm perspective, but also helping societies and communities to build long-term resilience to what are really the long-term crises of humanity. And so we see climate-related issues are driving humanitarian emergencies around the world, and we know that these crises will increase as the impacts of climate change intensify, and working together as one is needed. My question is, how can we ensure that the urgency, the humanitarian needs are driven by science and by the evidence of climate change, not only to prevent the crisis, but also to build resilience and ensure that humanitarian support is climate resilient and helps bringing local solutions to climate adaptation? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bruno. And indeed, the climate change is the topic of the day and really of our times to be able to work on. One last question that I want to take, and I'm delighted to bring on the call Mette Peterson, who is actually with us in the room. So Mette, if you come forward. Mette is the director of the Red Cross, the European Union office, and we can use this microphone over here. Very, very briefly, we are running over time. I'm going to take us to 35 minutes past the hour. So we're going to extend by 5 minutes to allow us to really take it forward. So Mette, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief, so I'll just ask my question because I think we've talked so much about the importance of the local leadership. And so the question from our side is really to say, and I think it has been already addressed a bit throughout, but really how can the humanitarian world be supporting local leadership to make humanitarian aid more effective and efficient? Very short.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Najat first, and then I'll go to each panelist, and I'm going to ask each panelist to give us in a maximum of 2 or 3 words the key leadership characteristics that you see to put on the very top before we can wrap it up. So Najat, I come first to you in Beirut. Your reflections, if you could please give us your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much, Panos, and thanks to all the questions. I just would like to start with the question, regarding tough issues such as education for girls in Afghanistan or women participation from ma sœur, the Burkina Faso, or the social media. First of all, I think a transformative leadership is also about a risk taker. I mean, a leader who is just, sitting in its comfort zone would never get to the transformation. And we should remind all the leaders that leading on your own does not make you a leader. A leader is someone who is able to be followed by many, many, many others because you have been able to convince, but also you have been able to lead by values and to mobilize and create the trust. And this brings me to those very difficult questions and issues that we are always in a position to push. Beside taking risks, we need to stand for values very strongly. We think that it's a given, we take it for granted. It's not. It's not the case with many of our interlocutors, and I have to say, even among some humanitarian actors and development actors. So never hesitate to repeat the raison d'être of what we are doing, and we should not be shy for it. And the third dimension in that is build alliances. Nobody can can, transform alone again. And alliances are very important. It could be it alliances at the local level, and it's not only with local NGOs, it could be with local community leaders. In some cases, it could be with religious leaders for very specific issues. So you have to identify, each one of us is always struggling, identifying who is the best entry point and who is the best leverage we can use for us to push for the good cause. And as the SG from, of DRC said, it's really about partnership, but it has to be a fair, inclusive, and equal partnership. And none of us is coming as I am more important or less important. No, we are all sitting around the same table with equal commitment and with exactly the same common objective, which is really to protect and assist, whether humanitarian, as emergency or development. And the best way to do it again is for everybody to walk the talk and put the funding where it is needed. If we would like localization really to be effective, this has to be reflected in every single funding and every single project and every single pool fund as well. I can give you an example. As an HC, in Lebanon, I made it a criteria and a condition for anyone to benefit from the pool fund to have a local NGO who is a partner. So that's a way, to really force it. One point about the triple nexus. Yes, we know, and it's not always easy to bring the three-dimensional component together, especially that political is never neutral. It can be impartial, but politics is never neutral. So the whole point of, again, the RCHC is to be this bridge builder without compromising the humanitarian principles, but also understanding sometimes the political imperative. Over to you, Paris.
Thank you so much, Najat, and thank you for the energy we sense from where you are. I'm going to turn to the panelists in the room in 3 words, and I'm going to start with Nena and go down the line. What do you take as the most important leadership characteristics out of this conversation?
Thank you. My takeaway is that we don't have a magic wand, but I do think that we have a lot of strength to make things happen if we work collectively in a complementary way, if we are inclusive, and if we are also ambitious in terms of what we can achieve, especially on the resilience. Because, as I said, let us work collectively, not just on addressing crises when they happen, but put the strength together to work on the root causes and create more resilient communities.
Thank you, Nena. Charlotte?
From my side, it would be a lot of focus on the partnership. We need to cooperate in order to reach results. And then it is to have focus on the end goal. I mean, we face over 200 million people around the world who need humanitarian assistance, and we see decreasing funding. This is our call to action. Keep that very high on the agenda in order to build solutions. And the third one would be, and that is a response to some of the questions here, build from the concrete, base yourself on evidence in your innovation and in your development of approaches, and bring that to scale. I think that's important when we talk about nexuses, when we talk about building resilience, when we talk about how we work with youth, how we work with local partners, and a lot. So.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. Dr. Rada, your thoughts of wisdom.
In brief, I believe that risks and experiences are making leaders. And the passion and beliefs, they are making leaders to do the difference. And support and the trust, they are making leaders to continue transform, maybe to the magic words. Thank you.
Thank you. Giovanni, your thoughts of wisdom.
Well, selflessness, I think, is the most important thing for any local leader to know. It's about the communities, the affected communities, and not about the organization or about ourselves. Preparedness, a local leader or local organization can only do so much, but it is really, really important to be prepared to when the resources are available to be able to give an appropriate response to any emergency. And last but not least, discipline. I think it's the discipline and resilience, because in the humanitarian work, it's often common to find obstacles, but it's our work as leaders to overcome the obstacles and to inspire people that follows us to overcome those obstacles with us and have the discipline to keep pushing forward to generate life-changing results. Thank you.
Wow, amazing. I want to say 2 words of thanks before we close. I want to start, first of all, thanking all the technical team and the interpreters in the very back of the room for really their support. I want to thank my own colleagues, both the European Union and my own team in Delhi, for helping me put this session together. Really appreciate all your support. And I want to say the biggest thanks to our panelists, really all of you, both online and being with us here. Your thought leadership, your own experience, having walked the path and sharing with us your thought, but also your foresight, because there was a lot of innovation and ideas that were put on the table. It's something that we appreciate. So I want to ask you all to join me in thanking our panelists. And lastly, to thank again the European Commission, the ECHO, the French presidency, for really giving this opportunity for the first time, as far as I'm aware, to put the leadership discussion at the heart and the center of what we're talking today. I think we all stand behind it and looking forward to providing as much support, as much preparedness, as much really helping our leaders, both individuals and teams, to reach their maximum potential. We believe on leadership, we believe on where they are, and we want to do everything we can to be successful in where they are. And with that, I'm bringing a closure to this session. I'm running very dangerously close to the ministerial meeting, which is happening down in the plenary. So with that, I close this session. And again, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.